Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming to the November Brown Bag. We're fortunate today to have Scott Friedman with us, and he is going to be talking about your decision matters. Before we get started, if everybody could pull their phones out and silence them, that would be helpful. Wanted to let everybody know that today's event is being filmed. Scott brought his team with him, and we're really excited about that. We will have, I have water out there if anybody wants it, and then afterwards I made homemade pumpkin pie, so don't leave without a little bit of pie. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Scott. And I'm going to stay over here behind the computer screen so I can assist you, since I can't figure out how to make the remote work right.
Ready for the next one. Okay, when I'm attending a seminar or a lecture or anything, the first thing that crosses my mind is, who is this person talking to me? Why are they qualified? What's going on? So I'd like to point out that I do have a brain injury. I was diagnosed several years ago, about 10 years ago. I did go to this school, and I do have a certification in decision making and risk management. So all the information that I'm supplying today comes from things that I've learned over the years, taking classes, studying, reading books, doing all the icky stuff that we're not going to get into, all the ridiculous math and computational stuff. Next. So the agenda, we're just going to very briefly cover what are decisions. And I know this may seem like a ridiculously simple concept. Everybody knows what decisions are. But I learned a lot while I was studying decisions. So I'd like to be able to share that with you. And then after we talk about what a decision is, I'll give you a sample decision, show you why a decision is not so plain and simple, and then talk about decisions and stories, things that we grew up with, bedtime stories that people don't normally think of as about a decision, but they really are. Even if you go to the Dr. Seuss books, the simple rhyming things, there are a lot of decisions that are talked about in those books. And then a lot of people, I know I did, a lot of people here, I'm assuming, have decisions to make about the transition. What do I want to do? Where do I want to go? How am I going to live for the next few years? So I'd like to talk about some of that and talk about how this whole concept of decision making applies to what you want to do in the real world. And then let's talk about some of the decisions you're currently making. So it's about you and how these things work for you. And then I'd like to answer any questions that people have. Does that sound like a reasonable agenda? Yeah. A few nods? Okay, great. Next one. So there are two types of complexities for every decision. There's the complexity of the decision itself, which is the analysis, the analytical side. If you're making a simple decision, where do I want to go for lunch? That's a lot different than how do I want to spend the $20 million that I'm getting from the company for budgeting, for marketing. So the degree of complexity dictates how you address the complexity. The other side of it is group. And anybody who has had the pleasure of working in a group has found out it's ridiculously difficult to deal with. The more people you have, the harder it is to make a decision. So there are two factors controlling complexity: the group size and the analytical complexity of it. Next. So if you look at it this way, a lot of people like looking at things graphically rather than just hearing it or a visual. So here's the graphical about what I'm talking about. There are two sides to it: group complexity from low to high, and analytical complexity from low to high. So it's really two sides of a vector. And if we were to deal with something really high group, like we have 50 people in our group, we'd be talking about decisions up here. If we're talking about a decision that you alone make, it'd be down here. If we're talking about something that's a simple decision, we'd be looking over here. And if we're looking at something that's a really complicated decision, maybe a lot of different factors, we'd be looking over here. Does this concept make sense? Okay, so we're not going to deal with these because it's really high-level work stuff that gets up here. Most of our decisions are going to be down in this area. They're either very low analytical or very high analytical. Very low analytical would be, where do I want to go today? Very high analytical might be, where do I want to be in 5 years? You've got to do a lot more thinking about, well, here I am today, and here's where I want to be. What do I have to do? Versus a very simple one day, yes or no, maybe type decision. Did that answer your question? Okay, next slide. So in a sample decision, I'm going to set up an example for you. In a sample decision, I'm going to use cards to help explain what this is really all about. Okay, can I get somebody to volunteer? Anybody? One person, okay. Let's go with you. First step, and then you're going to hand cards over, but the first step, select 2 aces and 2 jokers. There are only 2 jokers in the deck. Flip it over, find them. And then any 2 aces. All right, I'll take the leftovers. And if you could hand those 4 cards to anybody of your choosing. Okay, John, would you shuffle up those 4 cards? Well, make sure you have 2 aces and 2 jokers. They don't need to be blindfolded.
Do what now? Just mix them up?
You got 2 aces and 2
I
jokers?
should look at them?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, shuffle them up. Hand them to somebody else to shuffle up. These are leftovers. Oh, yeah. All right, they shuffled. Okay, put them down, face down on the desk. Now, if somebody wasn't sitting right next to you and didn't see what they were, could you help out?
No, I'm doing it.
Just pick 2 cards, any 2.
Pick 2?
Yep,
Pick 2. Okay.
and don't look at them. put those two cards face down.
Wait, what?
Just leave them face down. And I'll take those two. Not looking at them. Okay. Next slide. So we're going to play a game. And the question is, would you play this game? Nobody's trading hands. Theoretically, if you had to pay $30 for the opportunity to possibly get 60, possibly get your 30 back, another way you could get 30 back, or possibly owe an additional 18. Would you play the game? Yes.
Well, the odds would be in my favor that I would make money from the game playing, although it would be a risk of losing half, even more.
That's correct. There is a possibility you can make a lot of money, double your money. And there's a possibility that nothing happens. You get your money back. And there's this little possibility that you pay more. Anybody else have a theory? Would you play the game? Why not?
Definitely not, because, you've got 1 in 4 chances of getting more money, 3 chances out of 4 of not benefiting from it, and it would just be one of those time-consuming things that it's not worth doing.
You're on the right track.
Yeah,
Repeat that, we couldn't hear her.
Okay. She's saying that you have a 1 in 4 chance of getting money, 2 in 4 chances of nothing, and 1 chance of actually losing more money. It's not exactly the right answer, but it's very close. Next slide.
What's the, I don't know what answer you're talking about.
Would you play the game?
She said no.
She said no. Okay, what's really happening here is we have a first decision. Do I want to play the game or not? And if the answer is yes, then we actually have a lot of decisions. If the answer is no and you just walk away, there's no more decision to make. You're not playing the game. So if you do play the game, you have a chance of the 4 cards to either pick an ace or a joker on the first try, the first card. And if you pick an ace, there are only 3 cards left. So it's not exactly a 1 in 4. You only have 3 cards left. There's a possibility, before you look at the card, there's a possibility that there's an ace left. In which case it's a 1 in 3. That means the card you picked, haven't looked at yet, is an ace. There's a 1 in 3 chance the next card you pick will be an ace. No peeking. Okay.
No reason to do it.
There's another option here. If you picked an ace as your first card, that the remaining 2 cards would be a joker. And if you look at the percentages of those happening, there's certainly a bigger chance that it's a joker than an ace. Similarly, if you pick a first card and your first card is a joker, it's definitely in my favor. Because the worst case scenario is I give you your money back. The best case scenario is you give me a little bit more money. Now, let's look at the next slide and we'll see why it's a bad idea to play the game. You don't have to understand why this formula is correct. It is correct, but the concept that I want to get across here is playing the game, your net chance of winning is negative $3. So every time in the long run, every time you play the game, you'd lose $3. Since you paid $30 to get in, and this has a profit of $27, the difference is $3. So it costs you $3 to play. But if you look at it as, well, I'm going to double my money, or the worst case scenario, maybe I get nothing. It's not the whole story. So let's turn over one card and take a look at what it looks like on it. It says just one card.
One.
Yep. Okay, the ace. So this is a good point to make this statement. You drew an ace, so you're there. And the question is the next card an ace or is it a joker? If it's an ace, there's a possibility, or you definitely win. If it's a joker, then you don't. If you go back one slide, can you go back? Actually, 2 slides. So if it's an ace and an ace that you have, you win 60. It only costs you 30 to play, so you're making money. But if it's an ace and a joker, you get 30, but you paid 30 to get into the game. So there's really no profit, no loss. This brings up the point that a decision is not the same as a result. It's possible to play the game, make bad decisions, and have a good outcome. Similarly, if you were to play the lottery, which has minuscule chance of winning, the chance that you win is different than the decision you made to play the game. The decision was bad to play. The result may have been good that you won. Same thing with this. We saw that there's a negative $3 outcome for playing the game. So choosing to play the game is a bad decision. The result may be that you win, but the decision was still bad. All right, let's go forward to... Okay, now turn over the other card. Joker. So what you did is you got an ace for the first card, a joker for the second card. So there's a 1/2 times 1/3 possibility that would happen, but we already knew it was a bad decision to play the game because we saw that you'd owe $3 on average. Now, if you had drawn an ace, and had an ace-ace, the fact that you won does not mean it was a good decision. It was still a bad decision to play. Good outcome for you. Are there any questions about the difference between a decision and an outcome?
I don't have a question about that. I have a question about why it's costing me $3. Because of my brain injury, my numbers are completely gone.
Okay, let's...
So why is it costing me $3 to play?
If we look at the odds, you have 4 cards
Yeah.
to start with, okay? We started out here to play the game was 30. Okay, general rule, got to pay 30 to play. Okay? So you have 4 cards. Is there any reason to believe that the first card you draw has to be a king or a joker or an ace? They have an equal likelihood, right? There are 2 of each. Okay, so the first card, there's a 50% chance it's an ace and a 50% chance it's a joker. The second card, there are 3 cards remaining from the original 4. If you drew an ace, only one of those 3 cards could possibly be an ace. If you drew an ace, there's a possibility that 2 of the cards left out of the 4 are jokers. Okay, so that's represented as a 1/3 chance of an ace and a 2/3 chance of a joker.
Okay.
So if you picked an ace and there are only jokers left, or 2 jokers, more jokers, then it starts to imbalance things. And the way that's represented is this formula. You paid out 30, so you start with a negative 30. There's a 1/6 chance that you're going to make $60. 1/3, and 1/3 times 1/2 equals 1/6. So that's 1/6 chance of a $60 payout. And you do that for each of these options. And you add them and multiply them, and you come up with -3. Which means on average could be 2, could be 200, could be 2,000. But on average, if you play the game long enough, you will definitely have this -$3 result, which is the value of playing the game. So this part is $27. So if it only cost you $1 to play, and your average result was 27, the average payout, the value of the game, would be 26, because it cost you $1 to buy in. That would be a good decision. Yes?
You're talking about a bad decision that can end up, the result can end up positive.
Correct.
So what about a good decision where the result ends up negative?
Okay, we're playing the game. He paid $30 to buy into the game, and yet he drew 2 aces. The bad decision was choosing to play the game, because on average, we know that he'd have a loss. And yet, for some inexplicable reason, he drew 2 aces. So the result was good for him. The decision to play the game was bad. And it happens. Happens all the time. We see it with the lottery. One person wins $400 million. Amazing. It was still a bad decision to play the game, because the odds are in the billionths of a percent that you're going to win. It's remarkably smaller that you're going to be the only winner. So bad result, or good result, bad decision. Now, if you look at it as just entertainment, a ticket only cost me $1 or $2, and somehow or another it filters down and benefits education. Okay, that's different than saying, no, I'm going to win. I feel strongly this is a great decision to put everything I own into this minuscule possibility that I'd actually win. So that's the difference between the decision and the result. Any other questions? All right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so when we were growing up, our parents probably read stories to us. And even after we grew up, we thought of those stories as bedtime stories with no other purpose in mind than a bedtime story. But what they really are is teaching us the very basic fundamentals of making decisions. So if you look at Aladdin, now there are probably 30 different variations of it, but everybody has a concept that Aladdin rubs a lamp and a genie comes out and they have a chance to create a wish or a want or desire. So what's really happening there is, what am I deciding? What am I choosing for a wish? Have I really thought out all the repercussions? What if my wish goes bad? What if my wish has side effects that I can't even possibly comprehend? Those are the type of things we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's one thing to predict how cards will turn out. And I realize it's totally different to think about how your life will turn out, what the benefits are, what the detriments are. You know, what if I do this? What could happen? What's down the line? What are the chain reactions? But that's what decision making is.
Would you go through the stories and show us the decision?
Well, in Aladdin, the decision is, what do I want to wish for? And what are the implications? Yes.
You want to wish for the, see if you get better to get the queen.
I'm sorry, say it again.
You want to wish to see if you get better to get the queen. You know, because those little streets and what you want to get better to get the queen.
Yeah.
It's a decision right there.
You could look at that. You could look at a lot of stories like that. And it's kind of like art. What art means to you may be different than what it means to me. What you've seen it may be completely different than what I see. And the same thing with stories. Many people can look at the stories and say, there's really nothing to it. It's a simple bedtime story. I see it differently. I see it as there's a decision that they're talking about in almost every story I've looked at. I didn't grow up with this book, but Goodnight Moon. A lot of people grew up with it. Saying goodnight to everything in the room. Fighting to stay awake. Good night, train. Good night, bear. Good night, everything. That's really decision. And it also shows the point of decisions are not outcomes. Eventually, the child's going to fall asleep. Doesn't matter how many things they say goodnight to, they're going to fall asleep. But as a child, they don't recognize that. So what they're doing is they're delaying the inevitable. In other words, not making a decision. But in not making a decision, you're choosing something. And the decision is, as a child, what if I forgot something? Maybe that's why I'm getting tired. I ran out of things to say goodnight to. So everything is thinking through what this means to you. What it means to you as the reader of the story, or what it means to you as a person being read to. Three Bears. I like this one. It's gone through a lot of names. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Many of us think of it as a children's story. But back in the 1400s or 1600s, it wasn't. Goldilocks was not a young girl. She had golden hair, but she was an old lady. And it was definitely not a bedtime story. It was a very grim story. Same thing with a lot of the things on here. Cinderella, very grim story. Disney did not invent the story. That Cinderella's story was in China back in the 1400s. But the concept is still the same. Somebody who's disadvantaged wants to make a difference, wants to do something. So the decision starts, what can I do? Now, many of us realize that we don't have a fairy godmother to rely on. We don't have magic, but we still make the decision. If we don't want to be where we are today, we have to make a difference. We make that choice, that decision. Where am I now? Where do I want to be? Want to be in a room with no lights. That's fine. The Giving Tree. The Giving Tree is a story about a little boy and a tree. And the tree gives everything he has to that boy at different points in the boy's life. The boy, as a little kid, wants shade, so the tree provides the shade. And the decision for the little boy is, how much can I possibly get out of this tree before there's nothing left? As an old man, there's nothing left on the tree. He cut it when he was younger, so that it's just a stump. And the tree still gives. And the stump is a place for the old man to sit. So the decision, you go back to the point of what are the implications as a child? I decide I want shade. As a teenager, I decided I want a place to hang out. As an adult, I decided I want a place to sit. The tree has nothing left to give. So where were the decisions bad?
Cutting the tree down.
Cutting the tree down. Bad decision.
Unless he needed the boards to build his house with as a young adult.
Could be. But there's still implications of doing that. So if you use the wood to build the house, the tree has nothing left to give. Now, it is a children's story, but it's got much more. I see it as really a story about decisions. Any other story on here that people want to talk about?
Well, what about the Princess and the Pea?
Princess and the Pea. Perfect example. Okay, the story goes like this. Let's call her a teenager. Was walking through the area and it was raining. And she gets to the king's castle. And the prince is looking for a wife. But he's only going to marry royal blood. So, I don't know what they had at the time, a knocker, a doorbell, or whatever you call it. Somehow, she alerted the people in the castle that she was out there. And the queen decided to test this gal's credentials as being royal. So she decided, whether it's a good decision or not, she decided the best way to know is to put a pea on the ground, mattresses above it, and then a lot of fluffy layers above that. And then asked the girl in the morning how she slept. And as the story goes, she slept poorly because there was a pea underneath her back. Even though no normal person would possibly feel it, she did. Therefore, she must be royal. Okay, I see that as having a ton of decisions. What determines who is royal and who isn't? Is it a little pea? Is that a good decision? I don't know. Why did they need to marry her? Why did the prince need a royal blood? And we start looking at all these different decisions, and they all could be mapped out.
Okay, I can see where you're coming from now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other stories anybody wants to talk about, whether here or elsewhere? I just picked a few that I knew, but other people may have different stories. No? All right, next slide. Okay, so now we're starting to pull it all together. We know what a decision could be. We know why they're complex. We know how they turn out. And now let's start talking about what they mean to you. When you're here, and this will be temporary, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, we know it's temporary. Eventually, you're gonna have to do something. And the question is, what do you want to do? So the first decision you're gonna make is, do I want to work? Do I want to study? Do I want to volunteer? What do I want to do? And one of the benefits of being in this program is they help you get to that decision. It's not just, well, thanks for being here, goodbye, you're out. It's, what are you planning to do when you go? And it's a very important decision. And no matter what decision you make, remember the outcome could be good or bad. Whether you make a good decision or a bad decision, the outcome could be good or bad. But hopefully you'd get enough time and enough opportunity to think about, how do I make the right decision? Now, one of the things I found out when I was going through this and starting to think about transition, I started thinking about work. Well, I want to go back to make lots of money. I don't want to volunteer. I don't want to study. I'm done with that. So I thought, I want to work. But then the decision is, well, what is work? Is work working for somebody, some company? Is it a large company? Is it a small company? Is it your own company? And then you start thinking about, what is the objective for the company? And how do I add value? This is a really important point. Value is what makes you worth hiring or worth doing your own thing. If you don't add value, there's zero reason for somebody to want you. Whether you're volunteering, I've seen volunteers get fired. I don't know how, I can't explain it, but they do get fired. Work, why would somebody pay you? They pay you because of the value that you're adding to the company. If you're not adding value, they have no reason to employ you. Study, it's the same thing. Why are you in a class? You're taking up a seat. Show them you add value. And then the question is, how do you decide what adds value? And I don't have an answer for you. I don't have enough information. But you have to think about, this is a decision. What do I do to add value? Whether I'm volunteering, working, or studying. And if you go through all these steps to think about what decision do I make at various points in time, you're doing the right thing. You're making a good decision based on what you know. Now, there is a possibility that you make the right decision and things don't turn out well. You volunteer and for some reason you get fired. You go to work You can't break through to that next level. And all these negative thoughts start going through your mind. Well, I made a right decision. Why is this happening to me? Or you're studying. I don't get it. It's too complicated. I have a brain injury. All that may be true. It's not the outcome that you were hoping for. Unfortunately, it is the outcome. So it is even here possible to make the good decision and have the bad outcome. But you are definitely more likely to have a good outcome with a good decision. You do all the work, you figure out what you want to do, you figure out how to do it, how to add value. And then the last part is you got to do something. So if you have this great idea, you've gone through all the work, all the steps to think about, how do I add value? What do I do to be the best student, volunteer, employee, whatever? But you do nothing about it. That doesn't do you or anybody else any good. You have to actually take the action. I suppose there's a little chance that you could find some value out of this, but if you do nothing, you sleep, eat, play games, whatever the situation is, it's probably not the best decision, but maybe for your situation it is. You have to be able to justify it to yourself and justify it to maybe your spouse, your loved ones, that that's the right outcome. Maybe it is. All right, next slide.
Say something?
Yeah.
Up there, what you just said involves absolutism, this or that. And what about, are you going to go ahead and deal with percentages of decision? Like, you go back to work, but you can't do exactly what you did before, you do a percentage of what you did before, but you're still adding value. So absolutism is a problem because that leads to the negative thoughts, right? So
I agree.
is that what this is headed to?
I didn't want to get into it here because it's very difficult to assign percentages to subjective things. Unlike with the cards, it's very clearly 1 in 4, 1 in 3. There's a lot of subjective decision making involved with, okay, well, I can't do exactly this, but I'll give you an example though. I used to work for a large international consulting firm. This is before my injury. Shortly after, I started thinking this isn't right for me. I left, started my own company. Then I got diagnosed with brain injury, cancer, brain injury, surgeries, chemo, radiation, blah, blah, blah. Lots of things. And when I finally was in a place where I said, I can do this, I found out I wasn't. Now, I made a decision which I thought was right and wasn't. I thought I could do something, and I couldn't. Okay, bad decision. I corrected the problem and thought about it again. And a couple years later, after I had gone here, I thought, okay, let's try this again. And I hired a job coach. I thought, okay, now I'm ready. I'm willing to pay the job coach. I'm willing to make progress that direction. And the job coach had one requirement: write down a list of what you want and write down a list of the companies where you want to work. And there was zero connection between the two. And she said, you will never find what you're looking for. So I made a decision based on that information. I wasn't gonna try to find a job working for somebody. I wanted to create a job based on what I could do, what I wanted to do, what I loved doing, which is why I spend a lot of time blogging. I don't ask for any money. There's nothing on my website that I'm selling. I'm doing it strictly because I love it. And my hope is I can give to somebody who will be able to take that information and better themselves. So how do you put that into a decision diagram? How do you choose? Well, if I go this way, I have no income, but I'm happier because I'm helping people. How do you put a percentage on it?
But, I mean, to me, that's a considered decision, you tried your options, and then you came to a considered decision, so it's not absolute, it's not this or that.
Right.
You made a considered choice.
Yep.
So maybe I threw all more percentages, because you introduced it under percentages, but it's
Yep.
a considered choice.
There are some things, if you remember the diagram that had the 4 quadrants on it, simple decisions, more complex. There are computers that could probably solve this complex thing. I don't have access to them, or if I do, I don't have enough money to pay for them. So based on the information that I have, I can look at the diagram and say, okay, here's my decision. Which way do I want to go? And I still may get it wrong.
Yes, of course.
I may forget one little thing somewhere along the way, and if I knew it, it might sway my decision to go a different direction. But decision making is really about understanding what you can control, what you can't control. There are definitely things you can't control. For example, if you made the choice to volunteer, and then there's a giant earthquake or a flood or something, would that change your decision? You may not be able to afford to have backup stuff, food, whatever, because you're living, lightly. So the outcome doesn't affect the decision. Your decision could have been good to volunteer, but the fact that there were some things you couldn't possibly anticipate, acts of God, acts of war, acts of terrorism, chances are you don't have enough information to be able to put everything in there. So there's a little bit of uncertainty. With the cards, the uncertainty is measurable, very clearly with numbers. With other things, we just need to do the best we can and make sure that our decisions are based on good information to try to reduce the uncertainty. If I said, I want to volunteer, but don't know how I'm going to live from day to day, then I haven't thought through the decision very well.
Also, your decisions can be based on your learning curve. You can always change your decisions as you get more and more and get more knowledge about it. So decisions are always never, making a decision up front is not always finite. I mean,
Correct.
You can always change it so that your happiness is always there, and you can keep perpetuating yourself.
Yeah, and like with the job example where I had these 2 lists and they weren't compatible, I changed my decision. I changed my direction. I said, well, this decision wasn't good for me. Got to do something different. Francis.
My brother was a CEO of his company, and he retired, and so he could afford to volunteer anywhere. He went to work for the Red Cross as a volunteer, and his supervisor chewed him out about some minor thing in front of all the other volunteers. And he said, I was so humiliated, I didn't want to work for the Red Cross anymore. So he resigned. So sometimes it's personnel issues, not a big thing like a disaster that turns off volunteers. He wound up working for Meals on Wheels. delivering meals to disabled and elderly people for a few years. And he was much happier because he could manage on his own. He didn't have to take orders from somebody else.
That's another great comment. Things happen. We don't understand why they happen. They happen for a reason. So you can make a bad decision, correct it, or make a good decision and correct it. Just because it's good today. I loved what I used to do. Loved it. The hours were ridiculous. 80 hours a week, pretty common. But I loved it. And after the brain injury, I thought, that's it. I'm never going to be able to do anything again. I'm useless. But it's possible to love something else. There was a guy that I went to school with here who had really been through a lot of adversity. He had a brain injury. He lost his wife to cancer. A lot of bad things. Now, he was very happy before, but I'm telling you, I have never seen anybody so happy as this person is today.
How about David?
It's possible to be happy again. But it's a decision. You can decide to be unhappy and miserable. Why did God do this to me? Why did the environment do this to me? Why did this person do this to me? Or you could choose to say, it is what it is. Let's move on and make something good of our lives. And I got that here. A lot of supportive people saying, you know what, I agree. You got a brain injury, you got problems, let's move on. We can't dwell on the past because, as best I know, we can't go back in time. Now, if somebody can prove me wrong, that'd be great. But I don't know of a way to correct the past without going back to the past. And if we can't do it, the decision is, how do we go forward? How do we make the right decisions going forward? Are there any questions here about what your goals are? Everybody has their goals in mind? Yes?
Yeah, so it's important to know and be willing when it's time to reanalyze our decision.
Well, I think it'd be helpful to recognize, you know what, I thought this would be great. It's not what I'd hoped for. Maybe I need to rethink the idea. And that gets back to, we can change things. Because it's a good decision today does not mean it's the best decision for the rest of your life. It may be good for now, for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Use jobs as an example. I've got friends who have worked in the same industry for 20, 30 years, and then they get laid off. And to me, that's a lot like brain injury. I loved what I was doing before. I can't do it now. Nobody will hire me. I've been laid off. Now I'm too old. Now I'm too this, too that. And I think, there's nothing I can do. But there's an opportunity to reinvent yourself, like after brain injury. I have friends that work someplace for a year or two, right out of college, and hate it. They don't like the environment, they don't like the people, they don't like the type of work they do, so they make a different decision. I think that's the important thing to remember. The decision today is not necessarily the best one for the rest of your life. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did.
Okay. Other question? Any other questions? All right, next one. Okay, now I've pointed this out a few times. A good decision will not always lead to a good outcome. A bad decision will not always lead to a bad outcome. It's possible that either one, good or bad decision, leads to a good or bad outcome. Because there's always that possibility, that little tiny thing that you didn't plan for, or you couldn't plan for. You plan an outdoor wedding and it rains. You couldn't plan for it. I mean, you could try, but it takes so long to plan these things. You couldn't possibly know the weather in 6 months. So my hope for you is that you will recognize a good decision and pursue it. Recognize a bad decision and avoid it. And know the difference between outcomes and decisions. That's really the whole purpose of this talk. Not to get into the detail of what is the percentage of going this direction, what is the chance of going in that direction, but just understanding there are differences between decisions and outcomes, and what good decisions look like and what they don't look like. Next slide. All right, any questions? Yes?
When you're talking about decision making, I think it's really important that what I learned here in this program was that basically you need to know your limitations, and just learning about yourself through this program has helped me make better decisions. Like for instance, like Michelle, the Mind Tool book, right? Mind Tool. Even though I can't remember all the different tools, the mind tools, I left it on my phone. I can pull it anytime I want. I can review that. And if I need to have a good, like, analytical base of making theoretical type decisions, I can go right to that and make my best decision based on something like that. And so, there's a lot of tools here that are important for this program and for us that help us do that. Such as the mind tools.
Yeah.
Resources, you need resources.
I think that's a really good point. We have to understand what we can do and what we can't do. And if we can't do something, how can we overcome it? How can we turn that obstacle into a benefit? Well, look, I can't do something, so I'll try something else. Or I'll use a tool. I don't have a good memory, so I have to start writing things down. It's an excellent point.
Can I say an example?
Yeah.
An example for myself, I had 300 people working for me when I had my brain injury. And so I lost like 2/3 of my company. And I've tried to, in this program, I always tried to keep that together, and I really had a hard time. But after thinking about it, I know I can't do what I used to do. So what I do is I'm very happy with what I have left. And basically I've settled, and I'm very happy about settling, and it makes me very happy. And it's a personal thing. And so I'm not gonna go out there and get 300 more people working for me. I don't want it, it's a personal thing. So, basically, being in this program, it helped me get out there again. I know my shortfalls, and I'm gonna live with them and be happy with it. And I think that's really important, I'll never be as big as I used to be, but, I don't wanna be as big as I used to be. I've come to that, it was killing me before,
It's a good point. The first part of understanding decisions is being able to recognize what you can do and what you can't do. If you can't recognize that part, it's really difficult to decide which path to take.
And it's no fun setting yourself up for failure. You know, if you set your goals too high and you can't do them, you don't know that, you're in big trouble from the very beginning. So
When-
it's important, you know.
I don't know if it's still used, but when I was going through the program, we used the concept of SMART goals a lot.
Exactly.
Still use that? Okay. The idea with SMART goals is things have to be achievable. They have to be realistic.
Like, I can't remember the SMART, what they all stand for, but I can go and look them up. Have them on my fingertips immediately, and then focus in the right direction for the time that I have to make that decision. So, because I forget stuff all the time, so it's no big deal to me. I accept that, so I'll live with that.
That's great. Any other questions? What you want to do, what type of decisions you need to make? Everything was perfectly understandable? No questions? Come on, there have to be some questions.
Give it up.
Nothing?
Thank you, Scott.
Scott, does everyone know about your website?
If you don't know about the website, there are cards here that have the website listed on them, beyondinjury.com.